Hello everyone, it is your favorite man-made disaster Keki here, and I've been pondering on how to spend my time after finishing Art Fight this year. I thought about maybe attempting Inktober again this year, but I never seem to have a good track record for keeping up with those kinds of things. So, I figured, why not start something that's going to be even harder and take twice as long? If you've been here for a while, you'll probably remember my What If One Piece characters were in Genshin Impact video. So now we're rolling back the clock and doing it once more, this time for Aphmau. I've only done 10 characters this time since I started these designs, almost 2 full calendar months ago. Maybe more, depending on when this video releases. I also want to give a massive shout out to my Twitter mutuals Mochi and Solus, 2 artists who have helped so much with this video, and honestly, doing it without their feedback sounds like an absolute nightmare, so please go and check out both of their stuff. Alright, now that everything's said and done, let's get right into our first character. As logic dictates, we're starting with our titular main character, Aphmau. Before this project, I really wanted to plan out the regions these characters would be from, their backstories, their visions, and their weapons. I figured these characters would be replacing the canon Genshin characters since there was so much I wanted to change in the Traveler story to help fit the Aphmau narrative. So, Aphmau is going to be one of our travelers in the story. I wanted her path to mimic the original story of Irene so that she's still connected to that heritage in this AU. I'll start by saying that the Divine Warriors from Diaries will be our version of the 7 Archons. Now, I know that there are only 6 Divine Warriors, so I've decided to make up a little lore on my own and say that the 7th Archon, the one that equates to the Saritsa, will be more like Natlan's Archon. We'll get to that later when we go over our Natlanese characters, so let's move on. In this specific illustration, I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep her just one element, but I feel like switching elements is too instrumental of a game mechanic for the Traveler, so I just had to include it. Although I will say it doesn't start out that way. In the same manner you unlock a new element with the Traveler each time you resonate with the Statue of the Seven, Aphmau will eventually take on those same elemental characteristics. I wanted to start her off with a Hydro Vision and place her in the very first region of the game, Mondstadt. In this story, Aphmau was born and raised in Mondstadt, never knowing or suspecting that she was different from other people around her. While growing up, she always dreamed of adventure, traveling the world with nothing holding her back. She would join the Knights of Favonius as soon as she could, wanting to help people who were in need until she was ready to set out on a journey of her own. It wasn't until a mission to the Church of the Matron Irene in the city where she'd be recognized by a prophet as a vessel for Irene's power. Her life would become way too hectic to bear until she left a statement of freedom at the church and embarked on her journey in the middle of the night. I feel like her journey through to that would involve her learning about the cultures and histories of the different nations while also unraveling why she, of all people, held the power of Irene inside her. And that's what I have for the base story so far. As for her design... Okay, listen. I've done this before. Same amount of characters, same design conventions, same lore. I thought this would be easy, but by God's holy light, was this an absolute nightmare to figure out. I love how in the One Piece video, I barely had any trouble with the outfits and it was all posing, and now everything has completely reversed. I spent weeks, literal weeks on these designs, and starting us off was by far the easiest. I knew I wanted Aphmau to seem different from most others in Teyvat, so I had a little bit of leeway before getting into the stricter design tropes of the other regions and characters. I drew up a first draft that I hated, and then I drew up a second draft that I also hated, and then I drew up a third draft that I—
Get on with it! Yes! Get on with it!
So I did a bunch of sketches and picked my favorite from the bunch. Keeping her color palette to only a couple colors was pretty important to me since too many colors would make her design look weird when her element changes. It's the whole reason the actual Traveler's colors are limited to white, black, and gold. I knew her main color had to be purple since that's literally her whole brand at this point. Keeping her design mainly white, purple, black, and gold, with a touch of red as an accent, was the palette I ended up sticking to, while trying to make sure it was light enough to not clash with the other elemental colors. I made my first draft and sent it off to Solus and Mochi for review, and this is what Solus gave me back. If you couldn't tell, Solus is really good at this. So, after a couple of adjustments based off of Solus's notes, this is Aphmau's final design. Let's start on the splash art. So yeah, now you can see why this video took so long to finish. The most prominent part of most Genshin designs are the gold accents that appear on nearly every character and the patterns that make up the clothing. I wanted to make Aphmau's design a representation of a lot of the in-game monsters just to pay homage to them in some way. The red accent in her design is not just because of how significant Erin's bandana is to her, and of course I had to add it, but also that the gems that Irene has in her design are red, and I thought that would give a nice little accent to things. She's also got these little gems on her shoes, in the ornaments on her cape, and on the large star-shaped panel on her skirt that align with whatever element she's resonating with, just like the actual Traveler. Stars were a huge part of the design for her, as I wanted to give her something that made her feel set apart from the rest without being super obvious. I also made the executive decision to not give her a classic Mondstatter vision, but one shaped like Irene's symbol in lore. Although it doesn't really matter since you can't really see it in the final splash, so it's fine. Anyway, there is so much more I could say about her design and the lore surrounding her story, but this is turning out to be much longer than I originally thought it was, so we gotta move on. It's time we go off track a bit from the order I drew these in since, I don't know, consistency's sake. Whatever, it's time for Eren. Eren's style and nation were a breeze to figure out since it was practically handed to me while I was brainstorming for this video. I decided to give Eren a pyro vision and make him from the Nation of War, Natlan. Now, I mentioned Natlanese characters briefly in Aphmau's segment, so let me quickly explain for those not in the know. All of Natlan's Archons have been human, and the role of Archon is more like a government official rather than a god like the other Archons seem to be. As for my lore, and the fact that I've made each of the Divine Warriors take on the Archon roles, I've decided to make Eren the acting Pyro Archon in this AU. Eren's life before becoming the Pyro Archon isn't something I think would be well known to Natlan before the Archon quest, but would be gradually revealed as Aphmau continues on her journey. One thing I will mention is that Eren's lore won't be like Mavwika's, what with the prophecy and 500-year sleep sort of thing. He loves the people of Natlan and is a relatively fresh pick for Archon, so he's a bit awkward when it comes to making genuine connections with his citizens without, freaking them out or something. I did give him a vision, even though I know when he gets handed the Gnosis, he gets imbued with the power of the Sacred Flame, but I still believe he'd hang on to it for sentimental reasons. Lore bits aside, let's take a look at his design. I made him an animal hybrid since his werewolf genes are pretty integral to his character in my street. I based him off of an African wolf dog, which I believe Kachina is also based on, but editor Keki can fact check me on that. In the end, everyone said his extremities looked like Goro, which wasn't really what I was going for, but it's okay, I guess. I also made his gold boot covers kind of look like paws just to drive home the concept. His general design came pretty easy actually, besides a few tweaks, and it was the same for the colors. His color palette that I stuck with was red, orange, yellow, teal, and different shades of brown. Teal was something I saw a bunch in my research, and I think it really does add a much needed accent color between all the reds and browns. There were some troubles with saturation and where each color should be distributed, but nothing major, like the other pains in my patella that we'll get to later. I wanted to add a couple design details from his actual Minecraft design, so I gave him his family's crest tattooed on his side, as well as some more ink on his neck, cheek, and forearm. It's actually a huge shame that you can't see the arm tattoo in the final splash, since I think it turned out so good, but it is what it is. This is the price I pay for drawing dynamically, I guess. The Natlan patterns actually came very easily as well. Honestly, Eren was a breeze now that I think about it. Maybe it's just because Natlan is fresh in my mind since it was my first launch day nation, but it's anyone's guess at this point. The patterns for Natlan are very geometrical, so adding these... how do I describe this shape? Like square spirals? Whatever they are, they're everywhere in Natlan, so on to Eren they go. The last thing I'll mention before moving on is that I gave him red streaks in his hair to add more intrigue to his head, and to everyone saying that he looked like Shadow the Hedgehog, haha, you're funny! Moving on. I'll admit Katelyn's story isn't one I've thought through super thoroughly, but I still do love the direction I took with her. I had her hail from Sumeru and gave her a Hydro Vision. I know I haven't really been explaining why I've been choosing the visions I've been choosing, so now's a good time to start. In Genshin, a Hydro Vision is granted to those who are dedicated to a cause or have strong desire to help others, often embodying outward commitment and responsibility. They can also be given to people who either have strong morals or values that make them want to help people. I felt Hydro suited Katelyn well, not just because it's blue and she's blue, but because in a lot of Aphmau projects that feature Katelyn in them, Diaries or My Street specifically, her morals and strong dedication to the people she loves and the things she stands for is what stands out to me the most. Although I said she's from Sumeru, that's technically not true. Her country of origin is Fontaine, but I had her localized to Sumeru by the time Aphmau meets her in the story. Katelyn's original job in Fontaine was in the Maison Gardiennage in the Maréchaussée Phantom, or the investigative branch of the task force. I'd like to think that many of her missions on the task force are finding certain criminals that cross the border out of Fontaine and escorting them back into the nation to face justice. As for why she's staying in Sumeru, I think she was stationed in Sumeru for a job involving the academia for a really long time and came to love the nation as time went on. She would then officially relocate to Sumeru City and move in with Lucinda, who we'll talk about later. As for what Katelyn does for work now, she's most likely an investigative eremite for hire, mostly taking jobs directly from the academia to root out corruption without raising too much suspicion. Katelyn's original concept sketches were more on the forest ranger side with a mix of Fontainian influences. I originally wanted to mesh her love for both nations together in her fashion, but that proved easier said than done. She has some of the same attributes to forest rangers in the game, as well as the folded collars and ties from Fontaine. Her first sketch was super plain, and showing it to Mochi and Solus just confirmed my observations. So, with that draft out in the world, I decided to drop the Fontaine inspo entirely and lean towards her job as an eremite with more reds, tans, and browns. I wanted to give her something practical adjacent since I am so aware practicality is an afterthought when it comes to Genshin designs, opting for a bodysuit with a sash skirt pinned up so she can still move around. Yes, I know, she is very exposed, and honestly, that seems to be a thing for desert characters in the actual game, so we're adhering to canon for this one, y'all. I also gave her that sparse kind of eremite armor the NPCs in the desert have with a few tweaks, and added a kind of scarf cape to bring back her signature color and balance out the warmer tones on her design. Her final colors ended up reminding me a little bit of Inefa, but maybe that's just because she's red, blue, and gold as well. I don't know. Whatever it is, she's cute, so I'm okay with it. Travis was the character that had the most open-ended brainstorming session when it came to figuring out where he'd be from and what his vision would be. I had 3 different elements written down for him and had just placed him in Inazuma for reasons I can't really remember right now. At the time, I felt I had crowded too many characters into Inazuma, so I ended up switching him to Liyue, and that's when the ideas started flowing. Placing him in Liyue gave me a bunch of excuses to dip into his Demon Warlock heritage, and I ended up sticking him in the Adeptus category. While designing his first draft, I breached the idea of him becoming a Xiao stand-in for this AU, and thus his animo vision was cemented. I also got a response from Travis's actual voice actor, who gave some interesting insight on why he believes Travis's element should be animo, which I will read for you now. Travis, in my personal opinion from his story progression, would be animo. Animo characters usually stem from a sense of freedom, with the chance of losing something in return. With Season 6 in MCD, he was free from bloodlines that tied him to something he didn't want to be, the price coming at the cost of his parents' lives, who gave him that freedom. Honestly, he's totally spot on, and I really love that for him, so that's what I shall have for his explanation. I think his personality would be similar to Zhao's in-game due to the circumstances of his background. Let's say Travis was born to parents with low traces of Adeptus power in them after many generations of human and Adeptus intermarriage. Travis's family was particularly susceptible to the influence of fallen gods and often ended up possessed by beings who wished harm to others. Travis's family would live in seclusion because of that, self-sufficient and isolated from the people they could potentially hurt. From an early age, Travis would be possessed multiple times by corrupted beings, but would be able to appease and calm the spirits until they were ready to move on. It wasn't until the god his father had sealed away broke free from its binding, attacking his family and gravely injuring himself, Travis, and his mother, that Travis found his pacification wouldn't work on this creature. Travis's father would seal the entity inside Travis before passing on with his wife in order to not let the god take control of his body, and Travis would spend the rest of his days protecting Liyue from these falling deities by either exorcising them or sealing them inside himself like a prison. This main deity would be the Genshin version of the Demon Warlock and would be the primary force that causes Travis to never trust himself to be near human civilization in fear of losing control like his father did. At least, That's what I have brainstormed for him. His first design draft was something I really liked. I wanted to keep that wanderer aesthetic like Kazuha and Scaramouche have in the actual game, so the loose fabrics and scarves were a must. Mochi and Solus liked the first draft as well, but by the time I was drawing Travis, we were already quite far into drawing characters at this point, and Mochi brought up a good point that most of the designs I had been churning out at this point had been very bottom heavy and needed some intrigue on top. So I drew a couple points from Scaramouche as well as Chongyun's design, and the second pass came to fruition. After a couple changes like mirroring the torso, he was all set for color. Keeping Travis's green was a must for me. I didn't want to take too much from Zhao, and honestly, even if I was planning on doing that, his colors would not be something I would want to copy. To put it simply, it's chaotic, but lore significant, so it works for him. Anyway, I had Travis in a lot of dark green and white to kind of symbolize a kind of yin-yang with the entity sealed inside him and his actual personality. I also gave him a bunch of jade hanging off his design, not just because jade is prominent in Genyu Vale, where I specifically wanted Travis to be living in, but also symbolizes virtues like benevolence, wisdom, and purity, and also has been associated with royalty, power, and the connection between heaven and earth in traditional Chinese culture. Having the jade he wears be sort of like talismans or keys for the seal that's on his body seemed like a really cool idea, and it made his design way cooler. Kawaii-Chan is a character I hold very near and dear to my heart, so I knew I had to do her justice. Making her from Inazuma was a no-brainer since in canon she's Asian American, and her vision was kind of easy as well. There are a bunch of different ways people in the Genshin community explain cryovisions and how characters obtain them, a few of them being that the vision is given to those who are at a crossroads in their lives, are torn between responsibilities and desires, or are hiding something, whether intentional or not. There's also the theory that the element is often associated with overcoming sadness, loneliness, or another version of what I just mentioned, inner conflict. Nana, in canon, is one conflicted and lonely lady. We hear about her youth in Season 5 as Zane and her bond, that her family was quite large. She felt as though she wasn't able to stand out next to her brothers and sisters who were talented and unique, so she ended up putting on the persona of Kawaii-Chan to seem cuter to those around her in order to become her own person, separate from just being one of the many kids or siblings in her family. It wasn't until Season 5 did we actually get to know anything about Keki and her family, so I thought Cryo was the best element for her in that regard. As for her lore in Genshin, I feel like it stayed mostly the same since there aren't too many conflicting factors in her My Street storyline. I am changing what she does for work though, since the only jobs we see her have on screen are her IHOP job with Michi, her job at the maid cafe in town, and her job at the maid cafe that Aphmau and her co-own in Season 3. I figured I'd give her a job as a baker or sweets maker since baking was one of her strong traits in My Street. I'd like to think she tried almost every place in Inazuma in search of a job, even trying to be a shrine maiden at some point, but ultimately deciding to take a risk on opening her own shop once she tried everything else. During the start of the Sakoku degree, which I still believe would happen in this AU, Keki would join the effort to protect those who had visions and would offer her shop as a sort of secret refuge in the same way Yoimiya's shop is in the actual game. Her design was kind of difficult, since most Inazuma designs for the ladies have, almost nothing going on leg-wise, so balancing out her clothing so that it looked Genshin canon accurate was hard to iron out at first. I had based more of her first concept on Mizuki's design with a few elements from Kirara's design as well, but nothing was really sticking for me. I went through multiple drafts of her outfits, trying to make her unique and not just a recolored existing Genshin character until I finally found one I liked. I knew her palette had to be pink, but picking secondary colors to help drive home her feeling as a cryo character was proving pretty difficult, actually. I went back and forth between teals, purples, and magenta until I made her kimono this light blue, and I loved it too much not to keep it. Then came the long process of switching colors and trying to place them in the right spots to make everything visually come together, and oh my gosh! I would rather get run over by a Ferrari going 70 miles an hour than ever do that again. Color is never my strong suit, as you can probably guess by now, especially when characters have pre-existing palettes to follow, and this was a great lesson in how much I have to work on my color theory. I liked the idea of a cherry blossom kimono just because they're pink and adorable, but my feedback was saying that she doesn't read cryo enough with the flower motif, so in light of that, I decided to come up with a lore excuse, so I could keep my pretty pink Sakura kimono because I wanted it. I think Casey bought that kimono when she got her first paycheck from her bakery as a way to kind of represent her wanting to bloom into her life like flowers after winter. She still got snowflakes printed all over her outfit, and honestly, I think I cooked with this one. Zane was one of the earlier designs I drew after Aphmau, and was part of the easier designs to iron out. Zane is kinda like Katelyn in the way that they both moved from one nation to another and tried to naturalize into the culture. I've placed the entire Romave family in Mondstadt, with Garroth being the only brother who stayed, but we'll get into him later. Zane's vision is animo, and I feel like his desires to be free from social pressures would push him in that direction, but also animo vision holders usually wish for a freedom that they have sort of already achieved in a way. The main example is Jean and the Knights of Favonius, and Hasia with being a detective. Animo vision holders also hold a deep connection to the concept of freedom, often earned by individuals who have experienced profound loss or grief. It's basically the same things that I explained for Travis. They've also found a way to move past it or to achieve their goals and ambitions despite their emotional burdens. Animo vision holders often demonstrate unusual dedication to a specific cause or duty, seeking to break free from the constraints of the past or to help others find their own freedom. So I feel that when he finally arrives in Inazuma and experiences his freedom that he's wanted for so long, he'd be leaving behind his harsh attitude and strive to be better for his community, earning himself a vision. Oh right, yeah, I placed him in Inazuma. Because of course I did. I also feel like the entire reason he wanted to leave Mondstadt was most likely because of how everyone in his family was being way overprotective towards him, and his growth eventually leads to a reconciliation with his siblings in his personal story quest. As for his occupation, I decided to take a page out of the Aphmau SMP videos and make Zane an alchemist. His work would revolve around not just the casual alchemy we see in the actual game of Genshin, but also discovering more about the function of the art of Kimia, the main way ancient people of Conria used to perform alchemy in their underground environment. Zane's colors were kind of a problem since at the time I drew him, I can't say I was entirely in the zone design-wise and birthed this monstrosity from my brain using Xiao as my animo color inspo. We've already kind of gone over why Xiao's colors only work on him in Travis's section, so I'ma skip that for now. I had some sort of a hang-up with him keeping his primary My Street palette of black and gray, since none of that felt very animo to me. But this new color palette didn't feel very Zane to me either, so in the end, I decided his main colors would be gold, blue, teal, and black to keep his palette clean and simple. I also notably gave him half of a kitsune mask in place of his black face mask that he normally has on. I feel like in trying to naturalize with the locals, he would constantly go to help out at the shrine and matters concerning the community, and was gifted the mask from the maidens there. I think his role during the Sakoku degree would be more direct than Casey's is. I'd like to say he'd be using his alchemy to help the army in protecting the rights of the vision holders of Inazuma. And also, yes, it would not be a Keki AU if Zana wasn't involved in some way, so that exists. Interpret however you want. If there is Zane, then Garroth is sure to follow. I already mentioned how the Romaves are based in Mondstadt in this AU, and Garroth was the only brother who stayed, so let's dive into that now. I felt it too perfect to not make him part of the Knights of Favonius due to his diary's counterpart, so from the first draft of his design to the final, nothing really changed too drastically. The idea I had for Garroth's lore is that the Romaves are the founders of the Knights Order and have passed the role of Grand Master to the eldest child throughout the generations. Now that Garte had retired, the role was passed down to Garroth, who was probably a little stressed out after being handed so much responsibility that he never really wanted. His brothers would eventually set out on their own to avoid his paranoia until Garroth was all alone as Grand Master. I mentioned how Aphmau was a knight in her section before the church found out she was a vessel for Irene, but before that I believe she was Garth's second in command for a while before she left for her travels. Aphmau's sudden departure would probably take quite a toll on Garroth, causing him to shut himself into the Knight's headquarters and only come out when a crisis would befall Mondstadt. I think that after a while of taking care of internal affairs, he'd take a piece out of Aphmau's book to take missions that specifically needed travel so that he could clear his head. I do want to clear up that Garroth doesn't hate his job, he just does it because it was passed to him in trust that he could do it well, so he continues to stick to it even if it's not what he wants to do, and that's why I gave him a Geovision. Holders of this vision type are those who are determined, hardworking, and possess strong willpower, embodying stability and perseverance. These individuals are often defined by their enduring nature and their commitment to a long-term goal or mission, which they pursue with unshakable resolve and are validated by their vision. So, it's perfect. I stated earlier that all drafts I had for Garroth were knightly, but finding out who to base him on to get that Genshin feel was tricky since guess what character got released the moment I started drawing him? Yep. Barca. That is literally just Garroth. I'll admit, I was a little discouraged when I saw just how similar Varka was to my Garroth design I had planned for this AU, even though I have been waiting to see what Varka looks like for ages now, but there wasn't really anything I could do here. The only saving grace was that Varka's element is Animo, and not Geo, but it still doesn't help that they're both tall, blonde Claymore users who are Grandmasters of the Knights of Favonius. You know what? I am probably the only one who has an issue with this, so whatever. Whatever. I don't care. Do you care? I don't. Perfect. Blue, brown, white, and yellow were the colors I ended up choosing for him. The first pass of his design was pretty simple, mostly based off the actual adventurers NPCs from the guild, but then he looked too NPC-ish and not enough Grandmaster-ish, you know? Second try was basing him on Kaya, and only Kaya can pull that off, so we finally end up with something more formal. I made sure he had some form of armor just so he can be ready at all times, and gave him a little puffball with some feathers to represent the dandelions in Mondstadt and the wings of freedom. Cheesy and corny? Yes. I know. Whatever. I don't care. Alrighty, we are moving far from Mondstadt to Fontaine for Laurance. His initial design concepts gave me a tad bit of trouble since I wasn't really sure what his story would be in this AU. His first pass was based on a sort of Risley aesthetic mixed in with the steampunk attributes that Fontaine is known for, and surprise, surprise, I hated it. I knew I wanted something sleeker for him, while at the same time not making his silhouette too basic. The only inspiration that would come to mind while researching was Arlecchino and her fitted design, and that's when I had a thought. That same type of elegance would lend nicely to a fashion designer aesthetic, and thus, this truly yassified version of Laurance was born. I incorporated those fancy type of antique scissors into his aesthetic to flare up his design even more, and I'm actually so in love with it. I also notably gave him this draped coat, kinda like Risley's, but a little bit more exaggerated because it's fabulous. As for his lore in this AU, I honestly hadn't thought too much about it like I have for everyone else's. I knew I wanted to give him a hydrovision since his personal sense of justice is his most prominent feature in Diaries, so having said that, let's just say Laurance was an orphan for as long as he could remember. Running along the streets of Fontaine, searching for jobs that would help him support himself was a common thing for him until he would be caught up in an altercation with some older kids, until an older man stepped up to save him. The man would offer Laurance refuge at his tailoring shop downtown, and after seeing how interested little Laurance was in the trade, he would offer him an apprenticeship. After working under the old man for many years, Laurance would see the kindness and joy he would spread to people, not just through his actions, but through his craft, becoming Laurance's pseudo-father figure. But happiness never really lasts forever, especially not in a city with uncontrollable night crime. Laurance and the other shop owners would find the promenade sacked and desolate, some shop owners injured or even worse, and unfortunately the old man was not so lucky. The perpetrators were never found, at least publicly, and I believe that after Laurance took over the shop, he swore to be just like the old man who brought joy to everyone while working tirelessly to make sure the criminals who killed him were brought to justice. Moving away from depressing lore for right now, let's talk color. Laurance's pre-established color palette is mostly green with a few light blues, and sometimes orange. And honestly, that doesn't really match the whole Hydro vibe, believe it or not. I tried a bunch of color combos trying to make the green work, but let's just say we were very unsuccessful. It wasn't until I ran these by my family when they suggested a sort of tropical sea vibe for the colors, kind of like the waters that are that pretty teal green to blue gradient, and it all started to work out. I'll admit, I did still try to make the green work after that, but ultimately made the coat brown, which unexpectedly leaned more detective, which was pretty much perfect for his storyline. Not to mention, the brown goes wonderfully with his hair, so it all works out in the end. Last thing I added was his little golden spectacles and his sword, which was modeled after fancy antique scissors. Now I know someone is eventually going to be like, wow, scissor swords, so creative, to which I will remind you that this exists in the game, so I don't think it matters all that much. If my Bennett can equip a fish, I think Laurance can equip half of a scissor, okay? Okay. Okay, I'm gonna try and keep my cool for this one, but pardon my outburst if I am unable to. Lucinda. Good old Lucinda. I briefly mentioned her in Katelyn's lore segment, so let's go over that before I talk about my inevitable crash out. I based Lucinda in Sumeru for a couple of reasons. Mainly because her canon job at my street of witchcraft is very motivated by self-study and knowledge in one's field of specialty. That is also one of the main reasons I gave her a dendrovision as well. Lucinda has been shown to be very dedicated to the work she does, constantly learning new spells and furthering her study in magic, so I placed her in the academia in this AU, and had her study of focus be on elemental mastery and theory. What I have for Lucinda's story is that her goal was to research this specific field in relation to the tomb of King Deshret, since she was born and grew up in the desert. Her interest in her studies would increase when she went to the academy, eventually graduating and getting offered a research sponsorship to become a scribe for the academia. She'd likely spend most of her time inside the actual building of the academia, researching and experimenting with elemental reactions and the history of the archons. And that's kinda it. Her backstory and character didn't feel like it needed too much explanation for some reason, so keeping it simple felt like the best direction for her. Now, something that wasn't so simple was her design. I feel like every single time I end up designing an AU with Lucinda in it, I always find a way to pull my hair out by the end of it. So, her initial design was interesting. I can't remember exactly what I based it on, but that doesn't really matter since I barely kept anything of that original design. It was kind of a shame since I did like it, but Mochi and Solus had a point when they mentioned she looked too NPC-ish, and yeah, so back to the drawing board. They both actually ended up suggesting an academia look before they even knew her lore, which I did think was funny, saying that basing her off Lisa's Sumeru skin might be the vibe I'm looking for. But I felt like they were too similar in character, and I really didn't want to feel like I was just copying Lisa since they're both sultry witch-type characters with some form of purple on them or in their color palette that have ties to the academia. So, essentially, Garth's problem, even though I drew Lucinda before Garth, but whatever. In the end, it wasn't me who came up with Lucinda's final design, it was actually Mochi who helped finish her off, and I could not be more grateful that she allowed me to use her design for this AU. Thank you. The only thing I wasn't a super big fan of her design was the color palette. Yeah. No offense, Moch, but let's try something else.
Hey, it's not that bad.
Anyway, now that I knew what I didn't want, it was time to sort out the colors I did want, and thus began my worst nightmare. I tried a bunch of color palettes, wanting to keep her colors of red, dark purple, black, and white, while also adding some green in there to complement the academia, but also her dendrovision as well. And it was bad. Like, really bad. For quite a long while, actually. I spent multiple days on just her colors and got so frustrated that for the first time during this project, I made an Instagram poll to see what the people liked better. An Instagram poll! I have over 20 color drafts in my Dropbox folder right now, and staring at them just brings me back to that moment when I was just blankly looking at my canvas at midnight, trying to convince myself that she doesn't look like Daphne from Scooby-Doo, but that wasn't helping at all. In the end, she got a pretty sunset-inspired palette that paired with the green, yellow, and gold. Although it really does not help that she is one of my favorite completed designs from this batch, so torturing myself over this design was apparently worth it. We are finally at the last character for today's video, and that is Kim, who had some pretty last-minute changes. Kim is another migrator, originally being from Mondstadt and relocating to Liyue. I did start to realize that a lot of these characters had animo visions, and Kim was, no exception to that, but I did feel like it suited her the best, so I don't really care. I liked the first draft of Kim's design, but even though I, and everyone else I showed it to, liked it, it didn't feel Genshin canon enough for me. The ladies in Genshin aren't usually keen on wearing pants unless they are Arlecchino, or I guess you could count Mavwika as well, even though it's technically a bodysuit. Anyway, I made another design that was more based off of Zhongling, and it continued to evolve from there. We eventually landed on this design, and I started the colors, but, spoiler alert, she doesn't stay like that. While we're waiting for that to happen, let's go over the lore I have for her. I'd like to think that Kim was a Mondstadter who was very afraid to do anything. Her parents had lost their lives pursuing the adventurer's lifestyle and had left Kim to live with her aunt and uncle. She did love the idea of freedom, but whenever it came to actually acting on it, she could never bring herself to go through with it. She longed for a day where she could travel without fear and put her passions to use, specifically to be a perfumer. Now, I know that may seem a bit out of left field for Kim, but I felt that since we aren't really aware of what Kim's passions are in my street, I figured I'd take inspiration from the Aphmau SMP videos where Kim is seen being closely associated with potions and sorcery. I feel as though Kim felt she could never really fit in during her time in Mondstadt, even working at the Angel Share in an attempt to grow closer to the people in town. Unbeknownst to her, a lot of people really loved her, and when she finally decided to bite the bullet and relocate to Liyue Harbor, a bunch of the regulars at the tavern threw her a party to celebrate her departure. With her newly found freedom, she was granted her animo vision, and she began working in Liyue Harbor ever since. I talked briefly about Kim's design earlier and how it wouldn't stay the same for long. Well, now's that time. Something about her design felt wrong, and distributing colors on her was more difficult than I wanted it to be, so to avoid another Lucinda situation, Mochi, again, came to my rescue and thought up an edited draft and color study for me. There were some things I didn't like as much, so with much tweaking and of course permission from Mochi, we landed on a final design that all three of us liked, and thus began the coloring. I wanted to focus on the classic cloud patterns that Liyue tends to incorporate from their historical Chinese reference sources. Her colors finally found a home with dark and light teals, white, yellow, and small orange accents, and finally, we are done with all 10 of the Aphmau Genshin AU characters.
Let's go gambling!
So, would I recommend you do this? No, not really, unless you're a psychopath like I am. This entire video was another learning experience, just like how my One Piece Genshin video was, and this one had me pulling out infinitely more of my hair than the former. Anyway, blah blah blah, I'm glad I did it, yippee for learning and whatever, you guys get the drill. If you want to see me do this again with other characters on my list that I had for this video, well, too bad! You'll have to wait another year for me to even consider toying with even considering the idea again. Unless I get a Genshin sponsorship. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'm gonna go draw my OCs because I deserve it. Bye!